This video explains why Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and George Soros have good reasons for wanting to pay higher taxes. Hello, friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and George Soros have stated many times that they are willing to pay higher taxes. But the Republicans keep sticking to their mantra no new taxes or even cut taxes. On the other hand, some Democrat proposals in the past were outright confiscatory, such as 5 to 6% tax on an individual's wealth. If a 5% annual wealth tax was to be imposed on, say, an individual with assets of $10 billion, mainly shares of a company built over a decade, at the end of 10 years, if we assume that on the average the value of the shares do not fluctuate, then after paying taxes, that individual's wealth would only be just under $6 billion. That to me is confiscatory. But I am not opposed to the wealth tax in principle. I would prefer a lower tax rate though, such as 2%. With that rate, assuming the value of the shares does not fluctuate on the average, the individual's wealth would be 8.171 billion at the end of 10 years. That would be acceptable compared to a reduction in wealth to $6 billion in 10 years. In addition, it is quite possible that the annual wealth tax may be less than the annual return on investment, and the wealthy taxpayer may still see an increase in wealth despite the wealth tax. But in years of downturn in the market, the wealthy taxpayer may also see a larger reduction in wealth than what is paid on the wealth tax. The wealth tax is no longer part of the proposals, perhaps because many wealthy individuals will shift their investments from public companies to private companies. I feel that this proposal should be seriously considered under certain circumstances. I have not studied the various tax proposals in details proposed by the Democrats, but I will discuss them later in the video in principle. First, I would like to discuss why there is an urgent need for new taxes and then why the rich have to pay those taxes. No matter how much money the government has, it can always find ways to spend it. One can dream up any number of social programs to spend the money on. But spending on infrastructure projects is critical for our economy to keep producing efficiently and provide livelihoods for all able bodied persons. In addition, programs for the very survivability of the planet and the health of humans simply can no longer be ignored. The need for the programs to mitigate the effects of climate change was brought into sharp focus by the COVID-19 pandemic. I come from North India. When the country was shut down due to the pandemic, vehicle and other pollution stopped, and the residents in the plains of Punjab could see snow capped mountain peaks 125 miles away, which had not been seen in more than 30 years. That is when we all realized how important curbing pollution and dealing with climate change are. It has brought into focus the absolute necessity of clean energy, replacing energy derived from fossil fuels, and use of electric vehicles in place of gas and diesel powered vehicles. Massive investment in infrastructure to make these switches is needed right away. There is no time to lose. I have listened to Republicans in America long enough denying climate change. Either they have some diabolical agenda, which I doubt, or they have their heads buried in the sand. But they simply cannot deny the pollution. The pandemic has given us a small glimpse into what a world with very little pollution would look like. Enough Republicans must have traveled to India, China, and other countries to realize that pollution generated by fossil fuels is a reality. The need for investments in infrastructure has been recognized by both parties, and the $1 trillion infrastructure plan has already been passed by the Senate on a bipartisan basis. It is awaiting passage in the House when a deal on the 1.75 trillion climate and social spending bill is reached. The bipartisan bill would authorize the federal government to spend new funds on aging and dilapidated infrastructure such as roads and bridges, public transit, clean drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, high speed internet and power infrastructure for clean energy, prepare infrastructure for the impacts of climate change, cyber attacks, and the extreme weather conditions, among other projects. The White House describes the legislation as a once in a generation investment in our infrastructure. Since this bill has already been passed, I will not comment on it except to share my personal experience. I live in Tampa, Florida, which experiences many water main breaks because the pipelines are aged and rusting. Because of exploding population growth, the city is replacing all the water mains. To cover the costs, the city is charging $10 to $12 per month from all citizens on their water bills. Imagine the plight of a retired old person on less than average monthly Social Security benefits who now has to pay $120 to $144 a year out of the income that is used to pay for his food and shelter. A person with $200 billion in assets or $5 million in annual income simply cannot comprehend how much $144 per year coming out of the income of such a person and millions like him means. The city needs the funds to pay for these critical repairs because old and possibly lead pipes could seriously harm the health of Tampa residents. I'm all in favor of the city raising the funds to carry out the urgent needs. But the poor and lower middle class in America need relief. This is what this example illustrates and how important the infrastructure bill is. I'll briefly comment on the proposed 1.75 trillion climate and social spending bill. It budgets $555 billion for climate and clean energy investments, every penny of which I consider very well spent. The $1 trillion infrastructure bill already has provisions for investments in power infrastructure for clean energy. It means building thousands of miles of new resilient transmission lines to facilitate and expand renewable energy. Besides the investments in infrastructure, I'll discuss just one more program in the climate and social spending bill, which is the $400 billion for child care and preschool through programs funded for 6 years. The plan limits child care costs for some families to no more than 7% of income and stipulates work requirements for parents to qualify. Perhaps the program is justified with a time limit because of the inability of employers to find workers to fill job positions. As an accountant, I have served child care center clients. The child care workers are poorly paid, so there is a high turnover. So I understand the problems faced by the child care industry. During the pandemic, many child care centers have closed shop. As a result, access to affordable quality child care has decreased. Yet, child care costs have gone up and take more than 10% of a family's income and about 35% for a single mother. A CNBC report provides some insights into what steps companies are taking to address the need. Bright Horizons Family Solutions, which manages employer based child care and facilitates child care and educational benefits, is seeing greater demand for its services. Some of its clients include General Motors, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook. During the first 3 months of the pandemic, usage of backup care was about 20 times higher than pre pandemic levels, according to Mary Beth Bearfield, Chief Human Resources Officer at Bright Horizons. And it continued to be on the increase throughout COVID, she said. In surveying its clients, Bright Horizons learned that without backup care during the pandemic, 50% of employees would have needed to reduce their work hours 33% would have missed key deadlines, and 20% would have taken a leave of absence or quit their job. A Care.com 2021 Cost of Care survey finds parents are struggling to pay for childcare so that they can get back to work. 62% of families say they have more concern about the cost of childcare now. Plus, 94% of parents have used at least one major cost saving strategy to save money on childcare in the past year, including reducing hours at work, 42% said that, changing jobs, 26% said that, or leaving the workforce completely, that's 26% said that. Bigger employers like Apple, Google, Facebook, GM, Amazon, and hundreds of others have realized that they need to provide childcare facilities to their employees. Many smaller employers recognize the same need, but they are not in a position to subsidize it for their employees to make it affordable. That is why we are experiencing a severe labor shortage. Here is a simplified illustration. A family with two children under 5 years of age on the average needs to spend $18,000 a year on childcare alone. When one adds the cost of transportation, costs of special work clothes, eating out a bit more and buying more expensive prepared foods because of necessity, adds additional costs, say a total of $4,000 a year. Now imagine someone working a $15 per hour job, 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. That parent would earn $33,000 a year. Say the income tax rate for all taxes paid conservatively for that person is 15%. Then take home pay for that person would be $25,500. Then the net earnings after taking into account the additional costs for that parent would be 3,500 after the childcare costs are paid. Now imagine the plight of a parent earning only $12 per hour instead of $15 an hour. Then consider the plight of a single parent, and you can get the picture of the burden of childcare costs. Granted, the working parent will get higher social security and other benefits on retirement, and it benefits society in greater contributions to the nation's social security fund to keep it solvent for the longer period of time. But this still illustrates the hard decisions parents have to make. They have to weigh the other costs of reducing their lifetime earnings by taking themselves out of the workforce for 4 to 5 years by not reaching the higher positions in their careers, as well as the time value of money earned in younger years. These hard choices illustrate why many people are simply leaving the workforce, and yet they are needed to provide services all of us need from their jobs. Society needs their services. The Biden administration recognizes the need and is responding. I can go along with the program because of the dire need, especially as it is limited to 6 years. The government can then assess the need again and take appropriate actions. Now, all these government programs will cost money. We have two choices on how to pay for the programs. One choice is to keep borrowing, but the US national debt stands at $29 trillion. US federal budget deficit is nearly $3 trillion per year. So the national debt will continue to rise even if we don't add any new programs. Clearly, borrowing to spend on these programs is not a viable option. The Congress recognizes that. That's why they want to be able to pay for these programs by raising tax revenues. And of course, the second way to fund the programs is to raise revenues through taxes. Though I have not studied the subject in specific detail, but I will offer my views from an overall policy perspective on who should bear the brunt of the tax burden to fund these critical programs. Clearly, the new programs are designed to help the poor and middle class. Since they need help, it means they cannot bear the cost of these programs through taxes. That's why they need help. So the burden has to be borne by the rich, particularly the super rich. In addition, consider the fact that the poor, lower middle and middle classes spend 95 to 100% of their income to barely survive, and they also pay taxes at a higher average rate, whereas the rich and the super rich may spend only 2 to 40% of their income to live. The rest they save and invest for the long term, getting the tax breaks so that they have to pay taxes at a ridiculously low average rate as percent of their income, which only makes them richer. And they have enjoyed those tax breaks during their entire lifetime. That's why that gap between the rich and the poor keeps widening. Clearly, the tax code needs to be changed. The super rich like Buffett, Gates, and Soros recognize that. And corporations will need to pay a fair share in taxes. So, first, let me discuss why corporations need to pay taxes, particularly the wealthiest ones. Some of the richest corporations have been able to pay little or no taxes by shifting their global income around to countries with the lowest tax rates. However, I hope that the latest international agreement that corporations pay a minimum of 15% tax on income in the country it has earned in will prevent the corporations from avoiding tax. I have argued in the past for a 20% corporate income tax. The reason is that corporations use the infrastructure heavily, so they should pay for a part of it. They get the benefit of educated workforce, and education is subsidized by the government and paid for by the middle class in property taxes. We also do not live in God's kingdom yet, in which God will supernaturally heal everyone. So, healthcare has to be paid for. All businesses should contribute towards that. That will mean large corporations subsidizing smaller businesses. But it is right to do so because employees of corporations avail of the services these small businesses provide, which cannot pay for the health care of their employees. So, though I would have preferred a 20% tax rate based on biblical principles, such as Joseph decreed 20% for Pharaoh, and God allowed 20% when Israel asked for a king to be set up over them. I will accept the minimum 15% tax rate internationally agreed upon because a higher rate will lead to shifting income to low tax rate countries. The proposal is to impose a 15% minimum tax rate on corporations based on profits above 1 billion in income for 3 straight years that they report to shareholders. The tax is expected to apply to about 200 companies. So I am in agreement with this proposal. Remember, corporations avoid paying any taxes because of the tax code and incentives given by the government. But the government can change the tax code and should do so that the corporations pay a minimum of 15%. There is the argument that the best corporations that earn huge profits deserve to keep their profits and benefit their employees and shareholders. In my July 29, 2021 video titled Is Apple a Monopoly? Epic versus Apple Lawsuit, How the USA Should Deal with Big Tech, I have described why it is in the nation's best interest to have strong, highly profitable corporations. The US was able to help incredible entrepreneurs build such corporations, but such entrepreneurs should not forget that they were allowed to build such corporations because it is in the nation's best interest. But that does not give them license to amass wealth by using their monopoly or duopoly power for their own benefit exclusively. By they were allowed to achieve spectacular success to benefit the nation by becoming monopolies or duopolies, and by extension, the countries in which they conduct business. Most successful corporations should remember that they were allowed to stave off competition by being allowed to buy off potential competitors. They were allowed to become monopolies or duopolies, which allowed them to charge monopoly or duopoly prices and accumulate hoards of cash. This applies to corporations like Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Facebook. That is why the government and the nation have a legitimate claim to some of their cash in emergencies. In other cases, Corporations like Tesla, GM, Ford, and others, such as the banks, have been helped by the government in the past and will be helped in the future as well if dire need arises, with taxes paid by the middle class and just barely rich people. Therefore, the government has a legitimate claim on their cash if they are to become fortunate enough to accumulate large amounts of cash. The cash position has to take into account the fact that some capital intensive businesses need more cash for investment purposes than some of the big tech companies. I am not proposing that the corporations be taxed on their cash position in addition to the 15% minimum tax, but corporations with huge cash use some of it to buy back stocks, which benefits corporate executives only in their pay. The corporation can also pay dividends, which helps shareholders. In my opinion, the government would be fully justified in imposing a surcharge on stock buybacks anywhere from 1 to 5%. This tax feature could be permanent. Now, the total wealth of US billionaires soared by $1.8 trillion during the COVID 19 pandemic as of mid August 2021. It has only gone up much higher since then in the past 2.5 months. Despite their massive riches, billionaires tend to pay very little in taxes. In the debate concerning taxing super rich individuals, my position is still that the same tax rate should be applied to all individuals. Graduated rates can be justified in taxing the poorer and middle classes when we consider the fact that God allows relief to lower middle income people in his tithing system, in which about 3% of income can be applied for such relief. In the tax debate, Senator Manchin has stated concerning the proposal to tax wealthy individuals. He said, I don't like it. I don't like the connotation that we are targeting different people as people that basically they contributed to society and create a lot of jobs and a lot of money and give a lot to philanthropic pursuits. It is both punitive to successful people and unworkable. I have not yet looked into the workability of the proposal, but I would like to comment on the punitive aspects of it and that it targets different people. First of all, treating rich people differently, particularly the uber rich, can be justified only in emergencies and for the duration of an emergency project or on a limited time basis. I believe fighting climate change is a global emergency. In this regard, I have to admit that in the past I have been deceived by Republican lying. Though I do not take part in politics, I lean towards Republican views because they are pro religion, anti abortion, and favor the working men and women. Since they are pro religion, I tended to believe that they would not lie, but I have discovered that they have been lying by denying the effects of climate change. Other emergencies can be the COVID 19 and similar emergencies, which the Republicans have also been lying about, or even war that threatens to destroy the nation, in which every rich man will probably lose all his wealth as well as his or her life. In such emergencies, in some situations, kings have used their own wealth and taken some from the super rich in the nations to buy off invaders. 2 Kings chapter 15 verses 19 to 20 provides one example. And Pul, the king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, and that his hand might be with him to confirm the kingdom in his hand. And Menahem exacted the money of Israel, even of all the mighty men of wealth, of each man 50 shekels of silver, to give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and stayed not there in the land. For this reason, I am highly in favor of a wealth tax of limited duration of say 2 to 10 years. We have to avoid a confiscatory rate such as above 3%, as shown earlier with the calculation of a rate of 5%, that over 10 years leads to a 60% reduction in wealth. A 1 to 3% rate would be acceptable. Hopefully, the annual appreciation would be above 3%, and the wealth tax would not diminish the total wealth. Uh, if the market plummets, say, above 25%, then the wealth tax rate could be reduced or eliminated for a particular year. The effects of a bear market could also be mitigated by using two dates a year, say March 31st and September 31st, to calculate the wealth of an individual, and the lower figure used to calculate the and using the lower figure to calculate the rate. The reason why this tax should be imposed for emergency projects only is that major investments in emergency projects, such as infrastructure projects to mitigate effects of climate change, have to be made probably once or twice in the life of a taxpayer. After that, only operational funding would be required for the projects, which may be generated by the projects themselves. Now, Elon Musk has objected to this tax. He said, "Who is best at capital allocation, government or entrepreneurs?" is indeed what it comes down to. There are two issues involved here. First, most infrastructure projects are best handled by the government. Private individuals and businesses provide services as contractors on these projects. Entrepreneurs do not normally invest in such projects. Secondly, government generally provides subsidies for such projects to entrepreneurs who invest in them. Tesla, an electric car maker, has released $3 billion in the US and local government support as calculated by Good Jobs First, which tracks subsidies. Another way government could handle Musk's objection is that in the absence of subsidy, an entrepreneur could receive a tax credit against this tax, say of 10 to 20%, if he invests in such designated projects. And of course, he will also own the project, which he will invest in only if it's profitable. Of course, in imposing this tax, there is the likely problem of shifting investments by the rich to privately held firms, which would be difficult to value in the absence of stock price uh, in the market. While the problem may be difficult to tackle, it may not be so insurmountable. The second reason why rich people can be treated differently is the tax code. Senator Ron Biden's proposal tackles this issue. This tax, which is separate from the wealth tax, could be made a permanent part of the tax code and does not have to be imposed only to fund national or international emergencies. Senator Wyden stated, "There are two tax codes in America. The first is mandatory for workers who pay taxes out of every paycheck. The second is voluntary for billionaires who defer paying taxes for years, if not indefinitely. Unlike income like wages earned by a vast majority of taxpayers who pay taxes as they earn it, investors pay tax on capital gains only when they are realized, meaning when the assets are sold. Deferring taxes on capital gains allows the rich to earn investment income on untaxed money until the assets are sold. Rich investors can also time the sale of assets to minimize capital gains taxes. This is a very important tax advantage that allows the rich to continue building wealth over time. Again, only the rich, the top 1% of taxpayers, can take full advantage of this strategy. Low to middle income people must spend 95 to 100% of their income on daily living expenses, whereas the rich can invest most of their income. After all, they already have their houses to live in, and how much can food and vacations for our family cost? So they keep it invested for a long time and keep earning returns on the taxes they deferred. The so-called billionaires' income tax would apply to around 700 taxpayers and raise hundreds of billions of dollars. Again, Senator mentioned his dislike for treating different taxpayers differently. But this tax would rectify the past unfair advantage the taxpayers have enjoyed, which would be its justification. While the rates perhaps 15% instead of the 23.8%, and the initial tax burdens spread over 3 to 5 years, and the wealth criteria which could affect a greater number of rich people, Senator Wyden has Senator Wyden's proposal can be tweaked, but in principle I fully endorse the proposal. You can study Senator Wyden's proposal for specific details. There are other tax proposals such as an income surcharge of 5% on incomes above $10 million and an additional 3% surcharge on incomes above 25 million, over and above the current maximum rate of 37%. I have not fully studied these proposals, but they raise that tax rate rather high, especially if taxes on capital gains are to be imposed. Such taxes should be time limited and or the surcharge reduced to 1.3% instead of the 5 to 8%. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the facility to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But fortunately, Facebook does provide that facility. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.